Hello. Today, I'd like to take into a fascinating tool in data science that not only helps us navigate uncertainty, but also empowers us to plan for the future with confidence. Monte Carlo simulation is a remarkably simple process that yields powerful insights. It involves generating random samples over and over based on input parameters to model very complex systems, and we can predict outcomes. It's a technique that has been finding just amazing applications across many different fields. So, the applications of Monte Carlo simulation are used in many different disciplines. We can think about it in finance, for example. Investors might use this technique to model stock prices and assess portfolio risk under different conditions in the market. Engineers could use it to get really good designs, optimize designs, and predict the performance of different complex systems. So, if you saw the movie Oppenheimer, it's a story of how this physicist, Robert Oppenheimer, used Monte Carlo simulation during the development of the atomic bomb. So, Oppenheimer used this method to estimate how much uranium is going to be needed for this chain reaction. And that calculation really helped inform the design and testing of the atomic bomb. So, how could we use Monte Carlo simulation in nursing and healthcare? So, I'd like to consider how unprepared we were for the pandemic in 2020, COVID 19. So, could we use Monte Carlo simulation to plan for another pandemic? Because we know another one will come, it's just a matter of time. So, maybe consider yourself a hospital administrator and you're tasked with forecasting the demand for maybe how many nurses are going to be needed or other critical resources, like how many ventilators are you going to need in a future pandemic. So, using Monte Carlo simulation, you could use this powerful simulation tool. So, it's a mathematical technique that allows us to estimate possible outcomes of uncertain events. So, it's a way of kind of looking into the future to be able to help us have informed decisions. So, Monte Carlo simulation models the probability of different outcomes in very complex systems that are affected by random variables. So, just like rolling a dice in a game of chance, this simulation technique generates multiple possible scenarios over and over and over, which help us to calculate averages, and then we can understand the range of possible outcomes. So, the name Monte Carlo came from a famous casino in Monaco, and it symbolizes the randomness of gambling and putting it into these calculations. But to apply this technique effectively, we could gather the data, and for the pandemic example, we would look at historical trends, population projections. Are we going to have an older population, younger? Um, all sorts of epidemiological insights and more. So, for instance, when assessing future pandemic scenarios, we would consider factors like population growth, age distribution, how COVID or the next pandemic would get transmitted or transmission rates, how the healthcare would have infrastructure, and how vaccines would be effective. So each of those different variables are assigned a probability distribution based on the available data that we have and our subject matter expertise and their expert judgment. So then next we would construct these models, quantitative models that represent the relationship between these different variables. So in data science terms, that involves setting up a predictive model. So we would identify the dependent variables, such as the projected demand for nurses or number of ventilators needed during a pandemic, and then define the independent variables, which could include, if we were going to look at nurses, like how many ventilators would there be, how many patients in different age groups, what would the vaccination rates be, and other critical factors. So Monte Carlo simulation, the meat of it is represented the repeated sampling of these variables. So using random number generation, like millions of times, thousands or millions, we could simulate different scenarios by assessing the random values to our independent variables. So each simulation would provide a potential outcome. And by running it again, like thousands or millions of simulations, then you gather that representative sample, and then you can predict future scenarios. So this approach would allow us to capture all of the uncertainty with the pandemic, which is a real world process. So we would analyze the results of these simulations. We would quantify the risk, test the assumptions, and then explore impact of the various different interventions and strategies. So for a hospital administrator, that could mean having a better understanding of the resources that you might need during a potential future crisis. And then they could plan better, plan accordingly. So again, in Monte Carlo simulation, it's this powerful method for understanding the impact of uncertainty in a real world scenario, which is very diverse and has lots of different possible outcomes. So it's empowering decision makers from many different industries, whether you're in healthcare or finance, engineering, to look at really complex problems with a little bit more clarity and foresight. So we can navigate this uncertain world and use the tools that we have, which can help us to anticipate those challenges a little bit better, adapt our strategies, and then build our systems that are more resilient for the future. So Monte Carlo simulation stands at at the forefront of all of this, transforming how our uncertain world is into an opportunity for better decision making. Thanks.